Hi, my name is Pınar. I'm Aslı Pınar Tan. I'm an electrical and electronics engineer with masters from Bilkent University in Ankara, Turkey. And I have a degree in multidisciplinary space studies from International Space University in Strasbourg, France. I've been working professionally as a senior consultant and director in global telecom industry, but I have been doing personal research on a universal theory of fields and forces independent from any institution or university. What I present here is part of my research results where I propose a new orbital model for moving bodies in the universe. As part of my research results, I have mathematically demonstrated and proven that distance between points around two different circles in three-dimensional space is equivalent to the distance of points around a vector ellipse from another fixed or moving point as in two-dimensional space. And in this context, I have defined what a vector ellipse is as well. This is equivalent to showing that bodies moving on two different circular orbits in space, vector-wise, behave as if moving on an elliptical path with respect to each other, and virtually seeing each other as positioned at an instantaneously stationary point in space on their relative ecliptic plane. And note that this ecliptic plane is relative. And this is valid whether they're moving with the same angular velocity or different but fixed angular velocities, or even with different and time-varying angular velocities with respect to their own centers of revolution. Please consider this topology of two circles in space. The circle in the horizontal plane we call circle 2, and the inclined circle to be circle 1. We have an inclination angle of beta between these two circles, planes, and their centers are displaced by an L vector from circle 1 to circle 2. Now, point P1 is defined on circle 1, which has a phase of phi plus phi 0. This is time varying. And the phase of point P2 on circle 2 is phi. Note that we have a phase difference of phi 0, which can be constant or time varying depending on the circumstance. We define the distance vector from point P2 to point P1 as the difference of the radius vectors plus the distance between centers of the two circles. So it can be expressed like this: R1 minus R2 plus the distance vector between the centers of two circles is a distance. I have mathematically shown that the difference of the distance vectors can be expressed as a cosine phi term and a sine phi term with virtual A and B vectors. And thus we can express the distance vector as such. So if we define the virtual vectors x and y in terms of A cosine phi and B sine phi, this time we can express the difference of the radii as x plus y, which is like a position vector from a virtual origin. And then we can thus express the distance vector as the sum of x plus y plus the distance between the centers of the circles. Along this process, in all operations, I define the square of a vector as a dot product of the vector with itself. And this amounts to the same value as the scalar magnitude square of the vector. And here, the dot product of the x vector, or the square of the x vector, is a square cosine square phi. Similarly for the y vector, its square is its magnitude square, which is the magnitude square of b vector and sine square phi. So having these vector values at hand, we can say that this identity is valid. Based on this trigonometric identity, we know that the magnitude squares ratios sum up to 1, and this gives us the definition of a scalar ellipse in 2 dimensions. And this is equal to the vector squares ratio sum, which is also equal to 1. And with this equation, I define a vector ellipse in 3 dimensions. Now, all moving bodies in the universe exhibit some kind of elliptic motion with respect to each other. For instance, according to Kepler's first law, the Earth seems to be revolving in an elliptical orbit around the Sun, with the Sun at one of the focuses. And the Moon also has a distinctly elliptical orbit as observed from Earth, but with a varying eccentricity as it comes closer and goes farther away from Earth. So based on the mathematical derivation I have just briefly demonstrated, I am claiming that all moving bodies in the universe, in fact, move in some kind of individual circular orbital revolution with shifted centers, actually. And I am asserting that the relative elliptic motion observed is based on that mathematical relation I have just derived. So with this assumption, I have calculated the orbital parameters of the Sun, the Earth, and the Moon, using also an analytical method which I have developed. And the calculations are based on the observed Sun to Earth distance data and Moon to Earth distance data. So the resultant topology is something like this, where the Earth's individual circular orbit is placed in the horizontal plane. We have the Moon tilted by 24 degrees, and the Sun's tilted by minus 156.56 degrees with respect to the plane of orbit of Earth. And the obtained radii for Earth's, Moon's, and Sun's individual circular orbits of revolution are as such. Although these are approximate results, they give us an idea about the order of magnitude of their radii of individual orbits, because Earth's orbit is very, very small compared to that of the Sun, and the Moon's orbit is somewhere in between. As we can see, the Moon's orbit is also with an inclination closer to the orbital plane of the Sun. The inclination angle between the Sun and Earth's revolution planes is minus 156.56, as we can see here. So the Sun is revolving in this direction. And the inclination angle between Moon and Earth revolution planes is about 24 degrees, as we can see here. Earth's phase, as it is moving in its individual circular orbit of revolution, is about 151 degrees ahead of that of the Sun. So their phase difference is minus 151 degrees. And the zero phase plane of Earth the Sun and the zero phase plane of Earth the Moon is 60 degrees apart. So at any date, the zero phase of Earth with respect to its motion to the Sun is 60 degrees ahead of its motion with respect to the Moon. So along the way, in my research analysis, I have obtained many results, but among the most significant ones are like the monthly libration of the Moon as observed from Earth is due to the individual circular revolution of the Moon, with the one we have described here as this one. And the Earth is not revolving around the Sun, in fact, and the Moon is not directly revolving around the Earth, but their centers of individual circular orbits of revolution revolve around each other, and they're forming a binary system of bodies like that. And the Sun is revolving around a larger individual circular orbit, which encompasses that of the Earth and the Moon with an inclination. So the Earth's and Moon's center of revolutions revolve around each other as a binary system, and the Sun's individual circular orbit of revolution is much larger, encompassing these two orbits. And another important result obtained is that the individual circular orbit plane of a moving body in space determines its equatorial plane. The self-revolution axis and self-rotation axis of each moving body in space must be aligned along the normal of its equatorial plane. The directions of the self-revolution axis and the self-rotation axis of each moving body in space is determined by the direction of their motion, like the direction of motion of self-revolution and the right-hand rule, and the direction of motion of the self-rotation and the right-hand rule, which turns out to be in reverse directions, by the way. So, from a vantage point above North Pole of a moving body in space, its direction of revolution around its individual circular orbit is clockwise. So it's revolution orbit west to revolution orbit east. And this triggers its self-rotation in counterclockwise direction, which is self-rotation west to self-rotation east. These are two easts and two wests in opposite directions, in fact, in space. And as I explained in more detail in my published book, this, I believe, is due to Faraday's law of induction, in which all moving bodies in space behave some kind of macroscale charged particles with changing flux through their individual circular orbits of revolution. And the actual tilt of a body in its motion relative to another body must topologically be based on the orbital inclination angle between their planes of individual circular orbits of revolution in space. So, as an overall conclusion, we can say that planets in solar systems do not necessarily revolve around their stars, as we have found out for the Earth and the Sun. And this fact is also supported by observations in recent years about observed exoplanets, which do not seem to revolve around their stars. And astronomers have tried to explain this puzzle for a long time. And all of this raises the need to reevaluate existing theories about the formation, the expected motional behavior, and the topologies of solar systems in the universe, as well as our solar system, of course. More detailed description and results of my research can be found in my published book, recently published on Amazon. Everything is a Circle, a new model for orbits of bodies in the universe. And it will also be published in the scientific journal, Advances in Space Research. Thank you.